talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Good. You sound surprisingly well.
I don't think you're that surprised. You dragged me kicking and screaming into the modern age of podcasting. For those who don't know what that means, I got a new microphone.
And it sounds marvelous.
It will sound marvelous. Well, the thing is, like, our listeners they deserve the best.
They do.
And now they have at least average.
We're slowly raising our game up to mediocre, and we hope to someday achieve, decent.
Slightly above average.
Right, exactly.
Stay tuned.
Can't promise we'll get there, but, hey, we're trying, right?
That's right.
So today we kind of have a topic that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts: multifactor authentication. We were talking about this earlier in the week when we were thinking about, topics and things like that for the show. And, I said, well, we could talk about MFA, but it'd be like the shortest episode ever. And, the talk track was something like, hey, Jim, how do you feel about multi-factor authentication?
You have to do it.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So we'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Just leave it there.
Yeah. We could do that we could just do that with one tweet.
Yeah. And I have tweeted it from the at IDAC podcast Twitter account a few different times around MFA. And I guess that's probably a good place to start, because I did put out a tweet there recently. I want to say it was July 23rd, I believe, where there was some news made around Instacart. Some people have been complaining about Instacart accounts being breached. And what Instacart did was they put out a statement essentially saying that, yes, that there had been some issues with user accounts becoming breached, but that it was due to credential stuffing attack, which basically means the bad actors had somehow come in possession of IDs and passwords that were used on other sites, and then credential stuffing is basically taking those IDs and password combinations and trying them on a whole bunch of other different sites, including Instacart, and hoping that the user has used the same ID and same password elsewhere, which is extremely common, especially folks who are not maybe as, up to speed on the security implications of using the same password everywhere. And it's a very common thing. And basically blamed the entire kind of thing on the credential stuffing and users using the same password across different services, including their own, encouraging them to change them to a new password, which I don't know about you, Jim, but I thought that was kind of a tone-deaf response. This is just me personally thinking about it, because they don't even offer multi-factor authentication as an option to protect people from users. And it got us thinking, I think, I feel like MFA should be kind of the baseline stance at this point. It's 2020. Password is not good enough, hasn't been for a long time. And if you're an application or a service offering that has an authentication offering somehow into it, which most do, that at a bare minimum, you should at least offer MFA as a service. If the user in maybe the consumer space decides not to take advantage of it, well, I don't know if it's, it's probably a bad idea, but at least you're offering the tool to make them have a stronger authentication experience. So that was just kind of my thought around it. What do you think?
First I want to say that tone deaf, you stole my line. That is exactly the term I was going to throw out there. And obviously it's a catchy phrase in our society today, but I mean, you nailed it. But I do want to start with two things, because I want to say, first off, Instacart, I love their service. So I don't want to bash Instacart as a service. And also I don't want to bash our practitioner, who the IAM or the security people are over there, because that is not what we're about. I mean, I think we all understand the challenges of working for a big corporation. The IAM program manager or the security lead at that company doesn't have autonomy to make whatever decisions they want. Usually security projects compete with other projects for funding. And, it really takes strong leadership from within the organization who understand the importance of security to give that extra priority to security investments. So, having said all that, we're not bashing our fellow practitioners over at Instacart. However, I want to say a few things. So, what blaming the user for a security breach, I think, is just weak sauce, big time. People are going to use the service you provide them, and they're going to go through the security requirements that you have in place. And if you are breached, take ownership. Take ownership. So I think it's kind of a PR issue in a way, because blaming the user is just, like I said, I use the term weak sauce. It's tone deaf. It's all the above. I do think that MFA should at least be an option. That's the point that you made. At least like some kind of adaptive MFA, right? Certainly Instacart has people's email address at the very minimum. If you notice that somebody is logging in from a new device or a new location that they've never logged in from, you certainly ask them to step it up. The other thing is, usually when you have password stuffing, right, you have a bot that's running from the same IP address and it's hitting the same login screen and trying to log in with multiple credentials. I mean, that should tell you right there. You should have software that picks up on that abnormal pattern, and you should be taking evasive actions. So, I think overall, what's coming out from this, it looks like there's an underinvestment in technology to prevent these types of attacks. I think that MFA should be a minimum, and certainly the PR group, I think, needs to take a different approach going forward. One other thing I'd throw out there is that this hack happened, I think you said July 23rd. That's a week ago. We might not know the full extent yet. How often do we see, a hack, expose the credentials of 500 people or a couple thousand people? Then, a couple of months later, you realize, oh no, it was actually 10 million people. Much worse because, I mean, look, if you were password stuffing and there were insufficient controls, and you found the administrative account or an account that had elevated credentials within that system, you're not going to say, hey guys, by the way, we also have access to your database. You're just going to slowly and silently steal the keys to the kingdom kind of information. You're going to do what you can to get around. And, based on the PR response I saw, I'm not thinking that if I'm guessing that there's more to come, or there could be more to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly, there's always that risk, right, of the trickle of information. And I know I went right on the offensive, right? I jumped right on Instacart right from the get-go. So I don't want, and I think you hit something important there. I don't necessarily place the blame on the security team at Instacart. I think this was absolutely a business decision, because every security person I know understands the importance of having the proper security measures in place from an information security team perspective, right, in a program. I feel like somewhere a business decision was made to not invest in, this type of technology, despite maybe the recommendations that come from, the security side of things, or maybe even compliance or audit or something like that. And now the repercussions of it are coming along. So, and I think you brought up a very important thing, and it's that, yeah, you're right. Security teams and IAM programs and IAM people don't necessarily, have the decision-making authority for an entire organization when it comes to these types of things. So, this is probably more of a message to our CISOs, who probably get it already, but our CEOs and CIOs and the other folks that are listening is, at least establish a baseline security, and that should include some form of multi-factor authentication. I do like the adaptive approach, using maybe physical location or geolocation type triggers, right? IP addresses, things like that, to try and figure out if this is a standard login or if maybe they need to step up somewhere. You don't want to ruin the entire authentication experience if and have it be so obtuse and difficult to use that nobody can log in. But at the same time, you need to have that base level of protection because people are going to use the password across different systems. This is not new information.
Exactly. Well, Jeff, when we were at the Coopinger-Cole conference it was a SIAM focused conference. I think it was October of last year, and we kind of workshopped around the anatomy of a breach and putting yourself in the shoes. This information kind of comes to the decision makers piecemeal, right? You find out that something happened, and then you find out, you do a little more research, you find out the extent of it, or you find out the data was dumped on the dark web, and you're getting this information one bit at a time. I think that that planning process of, this is something that every organization, every practitioner can take away from this, is kind of think through the scenario of if your organization ran into, X breach. So we don't know exactly what the extent of the breach is, but as these things happen, one of the things that always stuck out in my mind from that conference is, they had somebody from the FBI there, right? At some point, you have to say, we have to get the FBI involved. Now, once you open the door for the FBI to come in and do an investigation, you're starting to you're ceding some control over the process, right? But there may come a point where you realize that we have to get law enforcement involved in what happened here. And so obviously nobody wants to get there. So it's really about trying to put the protections in place ahead of time. And when you think through those scenarios, and to your point, as a practitioner, as a leader within information security, it's about getting ahead of it, educating your leadership of your organization, your decision makers on what are the risks and what are the investments to help mitigate those risks. So you're never going to get down to zero risk, but look, here goes another one where sometimes our clients ask us, well, what are the motivations? What motivates the hackers? It's a variety of things. But look at this one, this Instacart one. They didn't come away with they did not come away with credit card numbers, right? Because it sounds, at least from the article I read, Instacart uses a third-party payment processor. But the last four digits of a credit card number sometimes can be used. And whatever other information is, PII information, somebody dumped that on the dark web. What could their motivation be? They could just be having fun. There could be, it sounds like they're selling these accounts for probably not a lot of money, but who knows who pulled off this hack? Sometimes you find out these hacks were pulled off by an 18-year-old. So they went and got a database of usernames and passwords and then ran some script that they downloaded off the dark web against a login screen, and they're getting some kicks out of it. And all of a sudden, they've got PII information on X number of users. Now they can resell that, and sell it in Bitcoin. And now they have money to go out and buy stuff. In the meantime, this is costing Instacart real money. It's costing them in terms of PR, which leads to knock on how much their brand is really worth. This particular incident might not be the end all be all, but who knows where this incident is going to lead? Now that PII information is out there, what's the next thing that can happen? What's the next chip that can fall? So it's really about educating the decision makers within your organization to make the proper investments. Things like hammering away with passwords, with stuffing credentials. That's something that should have been detected during the process and stopped.
Yeah, and credential stuffing and attacks like that are really good at building dossiers on people, information, right? Because you can associate all this metadata around the individual and start to put together a picture of who the person is, what are their preferences, things like that. And, let's say, someone does have Instacart data and they have data from the MGM hack where, they know where the person was, what they were eating, some of the things maybe they're buying, stores they frequent, and all of that is just operational intelligence that can be used by somebody, to target essentially. So,
Right.
I think we've beaten up Instacart pretty well here, but it's not, it's really the response I think that I don't agree with, in the fact that, MFA isn't a baseline. They haven't even made an announcement that they're going to be improving the security, and that, they take security seriously. And, I said it in my tweet on the IDAC podcast web account, that you can't take things seriously if you're not even offering the basics of security, and MFA is one of those. So
Right.
that's
Yeah,
my
it's
soapbox, and I'm going to kick it out away from you now.
no, it's good. It's good.
Before we get too far, I know we've been talking about MFA. There's also, and that's multi-factor authentication. There's also 2FA, which is a subset of multi-factor, which is basically two forms of authentication. MFA is, at its definition, right? Something you know, something you have, something you are. And then 2FA is basically saying, give me two of those things, and we can, authenticate the individual. I see a common mistake where people are using two of the same things, so it cannot be true multi-factor or 2FA in some cases, where they may say, okay, you need to enter your password, and then, here's a challenge response question that you also need to set up. Those are some things, and it doesn't introduce, another form of authentication, either the something you have or the something you are a component of it. And I've mentioned United example before. United Airlines, they have a KBA system when you go to log into a new computer, where you ask you a bunch of terrible questions that are like things like favorites, which I am so not a fan of. But there's probably a role there for KBA to be used as the lowest common denominator in some areas. What are your thoughts on using KBA or knowledge-based authentication as a second form of authentication?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to pragmatism. I think so. We pick on United all the time, and again, we don't mean to point the finger at our fellow practitioners. That's not our goal here. But our goal is to help educate our community in terms of what is best practice. But the pragmatic approach here is that you do run into scenarios where implementing true multi-factor authentication is deemed by the business as too heavy-handed. It's not, we don't want to push people away by making our authentication process so hard. And okay, what's the risk? And and as the information security person, sometimes you're pushing upstream. And so, my feeling on what United is doing by noticing, hey, you haven't logged in with this device. Let's ask for a second piece of information. Asking for information doesn't make it that much more secure, but it probably makes it a tiny bit more secure. So in other words, if I went out and had looked on the dark web and said, okay, well, now I've got a credential, and now, boom, Jim McDonald reused his credential now on United. Okay, great. Now I get this KBA question where it's asking what country did I grow up in, or what's my favorite ice cream or something. Well, now I have to have that additional piece of information. Now, do I think that couldn't be socially engineered, or it couldn't be somehow guessed? No, I don't. I'm not making the case that this KBA is the way to go. But it probably one thing that you potentially could come away from it with is that it makes it just a little bit more difficult, so the script kiddies out there aren't doing what we just talked about with Instacart, where all you need is username and password. It's not doing any new device recognition or context. Context being like, okay, what country you're logging in from, things like that, that maybe make it say, hey, we're going to ask you for something else. And in fact, if you don't have anything else. But so where do I think KBA could really be useful is in a scenario where you really don't have any additional option because the business is pushing back, or you inherited, an IAM space where you've got, millions and millions of users and they've never registered for multi-factor, and this is what you have, and you have a little bit of KBA data that you could potentially use for stepping up the authentication. But it's interesting, you brought up MFA, 2FA. There's also strong authentication. There's step-up authentication, adaptive authentication, continuous authentication. In some cases, they all have nuances. In some cases, they have just that these terms got popular at different times, and they don't really have a defined context. Or that, what happens sometimes is that in our society, a term will become popularized, and then the true definition gets blurred. It becomes the lingua franca. And I kind of think of MFA and 2FA in a lot of people's mind is the same thing, right? But you highlighted the difference that multi-factor means you're using more than one of the factors. It doesn't actually mean that you're only using two of them. You could be using three of them. You could be asking a person 10 different things all within those three factors, but that you're hitting at least two of the different factors. Whereas two-factor authentication, I think, could be potentially two items within the same factor.
And it could be even multiple people. I think of, the movie scene, right, where they're on the submarine and they're looking to launch missiles, and the captain and the first officer both have to turn their keys and put in their codes. I mean, there's layers of MFA happening all over that kind of stuff, which, for obvious reasons makes a lot of sense there. You talk about a few different things, and I think one of the important things with all those different types of authentications is the word pragmatism that you used also, right? There's going to be different use cases for different types of users. You've got corporate employees, you've got vendors, you've got contractors, you've got hourly, maybe your frontline workers, you've got external users like customers, right, for an organization. Each of those types of users are going to have, different methods where MFA may be appropriate, right? It probably makes sense to, well, back in the old days, right, send out an RSA token, a physical token with the number changing on it and everything, to your corporate employees and say, hey, this is how you're going to log into, our systems remotely. Is that something that's viable for a customer? Doubt it, right? So you start to lean on other forms of MFA like SMS, email, magic links, which is something Slack, for example, does, right? If you forget, or if you just want to log in directly, as long as you get to your email account, they'll show you a link that lets you get to different things. So I think it's important to understand that you're going to probably have multiple methods of authentication types or MFA types to tokens, the SMS, the email, apps, right? Using the push. So like the Microsoft app or the Google Authenticator app or LastPass or what's the other one that is on the app? Authy, I think it is. Right. So there's a lot of these different kind of MFA apps, right? And push. You've got biometrics, right? Doing things around maybe, a voice system where your voice is your password, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it's all of our challenge, right? We do a podcast for this industry in general, but the practitioners are dealing with within their organization or their client's organization specific challenges. So I think a couple of notions are relevant. Risk-based approach, right? If you have something that's extremely high risk, you're going to have to figure out a way to implement multi-factor at a very strong level. But as the risk of the access lessens, the need to secure the account lessens, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. If all your login does is gives you access to some very basic things, and if it was compromised, it's not the end of the world. You can go with fewer hurdles, right? Another notion here is there's a framework that NIST developed many moons ago called Level of Assurance Framework. It's this document 800-63. And the reason that's imprinted in my brain was I worked with a university, about 5-6 years ago, and they were real high on that. There's a group in the university field called In Common, and they have an In Common level of assurance framework, and it really helps for other universities to know that, okay, the other university I want to federate with adopts this level of assurance framework, so that I can be sure that they, as they pass me a SAML federation, they can tell me what level of assurance they have for that specific user, and I can apply my security policies based on that. So, those notions are very helpful. But I mean, to kind of get to some real world examples, one of the things that we've run into, usually with corporate employees, to use the term white collar employees, people who use computers regularly, they usually have smart devices. At least within the context of, on the United States, we can usually ask people to use their personal devices. But even that, I don't think you can just universally say everybody's going to be willing to use their Android or iPhone for corporate purposes. Really, that's, you're going to have to figure that out within your organization context. But smartphones is becoming expected, but we can't think of the public as everybody having smartphones. I have a funny little side story. There is a person who works out at the gym, and my son and I run into him, and he breaks out his flip phone. And the one time my son goes, "Dad, did you see he has a flip phone?" It's like, yeah, I saw that. That almost doesn't register with me because I remember those being pretty commonplace. But for him, it's like, I've never seen one of those things. There's somebody who actually has a flip phone. But even imagine this context. So we worked with a client recently who they supported some folk. They had some contract type folks who worked out of prisons. If you are staff at a prison, you cannot bring a phone into the prison, period. Right? So what can you use as a second factor in that case? Well, again, it comes down to, let's take a look with our risk-based approach. How much security do we need to apply? And then we have to look at the different options. You brought up a couple of options, which I thought were really cool, including the voice biometrics, and that can become kind of that low common denominator where the person doesn't even have a phone, but they don't have a cell phone necessarily, but they have a hardwired phone. So it might be a mix and match. Generally, though, where you need to start is your highest risk scenario. So this would be the corporate employees, but even on top of that, privileged access and access coming from outside of your network. Now, I'm not saying being on the network necessarily ensures that the person is who they say they are. That's certainly not the case. I mean, if you use zero trust security framework as a baseline, you certainly can't trust the fact that the person has a network IP address that we can trust that they are who they say they are. However, if we're taking a risk-based approach, the person coming through the VPN is riskier than the person who has a LAN IP address.
Yeah, there's no really one size fits all, right? And you got to have different options and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together to make sure that you achieve the security posture or stance that you're looking to get, right, to reduce the attack surface, that you're addressing the user experience as part of that, because if it's too hard, people can't take advantage of the service. It's too easy, that it's ineffective. So being able to marry up what are the right approaches for the right types of user populations, makes a lot of sense. And you don't want to assume that you just have a one size fits all. You bring up an interesting point, and that's around personal devices and leveraging personal devices for your work MFA. Personally, I don't care. I'd rather carry one device, and this is something that I've done for ages, is I use my personal device as my thing. And if work wants to put their agent or their certificate or whatever on it, in exchange for me having to only carry one device and not have to be like Batman with 8 different phones on me or pagers or whatever it may be, for me, that's that decision that I've made. But there are people who the expectation is that if work wants to use my personal device, they should pay for it, which, can be open to all kinds of interpretations and is not it tends to be a roadblock, I think, for some areas where, cell phones are not maybe issued by the business and they have more of like a BYOD type strategy. So it is something to account for as part of planning, and that's where some of these other methods, make sense. And you want to make sure that you rely on that.
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
I love that story that you tell. You worked for a large retail organization and you had retail employees, and it's a mixed bag of folks that you get in there, and there's a high turnover. And you used IVR for that. Do you want to kind of talk about that story?
Yeah, I will try to keep it a little bit general just to not throw all the secrets out there. But yeah, the idea was that, and this is really more of a password reset scenario, right? Hundreds of thousands of users around the US and really, I guess, now the world. And we had gone in and we're just getting off the ground with an IAM program. This would have been the early 2000s. So probably like 2005, maybe 2000, mid 2000s, 2005-ish, somewhere in that area. And we set up a self-service password reset system. And for our retail users who could not access a computer, or we weren't comfortable giving them access to it within the retail environment, we set up a phone line that had voice biometrics. And as long as you had pre-enrolled with the system and set up your voice print so that it matched your profile, and we had a secure method to do that, you could go in and then reset your passwords to any number of systems. Now, this is old school, so I'm sure it's gotten a lot better, since then. But it was a way for us to provide a secure way to reset passwords for our many, 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 retail users. Do you get a lot of usage? I'm not sure at this point. Like I said, that was almost 15 years ago, probably, by now. So I'm not sure if it's still in place or not. I guess I have a magnet somewhere that we use for marketing. I should probably call the number and see if it still works or not. But it worked, and it was accurate, and it was secure enough for us to take advantage of. It was definitely in the 9899 when it comes to accuracy. And I learned a lot about voice prints and how that all worked to make sure that things were working as they should. But it's a use case. I don't hear too much about it now, but it is something that I have some experience with in the past, and my experience was positive with it. And it's certainly, I feel, still an option that could be out there.
Well, one of the things I like that you did there was you applied the risk-based approach to use cases, right? So you weren't using the voice print for multi-factor authentication per se to log into the application, but you're using it for the use case of resetting, essentially preventing social engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than calling the help desk and saying, I'm John, and I got a line of 20 customers, you got to reset my password, or I'm going to have to tell these people to leave the store. You could do, okay, you can reset. The only way you could reset your password is through this system. So I feel like you can say, hey, that password reset process is a use case that is even more risky than the authentication itself. Now you're trying to take over an account that you don't even have access. You don't even know the password for example. The other thing I always thought was interesting about that story is, this maybe will transition topics a little bit, is, when you're rolling out a technology, you have two populations to think about. One is the existing users, and the other is, new users as they come on board. The new users as they come on board, in general, we're going to have a trickle of them, right? We're going, we hire somebody new, we have to get them registered as part of onboarding as a new employee. But in a scenario where you have hundreds of thousands or millions of users who you need to convert over to the new technology, who they've been doing the job for years maybe already, and now IT came up with this new whiz bang way, and it's, how do you get all those people to register? You got an interesting story there as well.
For registration, you have to refresh my memory.
So you ran a contest.
Oh, right. Yeah. I can't believe I forgot about this. Yeah. So we were rolling out identity and access management. And again, this is, mid 2000s. And, the idea was to reduce the burden on the team that was handling things like password resets, et cetera. So we were using KBA at the time, knowledge-based authentication. You had to, go in, log in with your ID and password, and set up your profile with your secret questions and things like that. And then you'd be good to go. And you could then, if you forgot your password, you could go reset it. Weren't happy with the enrollment rate, and wasn't really seeing the impact on the call volume going down where it probably should have. And we attributed that really to the marketing wasn't there behind it. So what we did was we put together a plan where if people enrolled and registered a profile, didn't even have to use the system, but at least had a registered profile. And that was something that I could see in the metrics behind the systems. We essentially would give away an iPad. And this was, hot stuff at the time, right? An iPad was kind of like the new big thing. And then it became like an Apple Watch as we kind of kept things current, et cetera, those sorts of things. But that $300 to $500 that we were spending to get, that device took our enrollment rate from like 60% to over 90% over the course of just a couple of months. And that combined with some other things, reminders for management, training our staff who were answering the calls to ask them if they had enrolled and registered so they could help themselves next time, right? All that stuff. But out of all the millions of dollars that we spent on the software itself and the services to get things put in, the marketing budget, which really wasn't forecasted anywhere, was probably the biggest driver to actually getting the adoption out there. So, that's a way to get creative with it. I think, it becomes part of the flow now. A lot of times when people are signing up for new accounts, it's just there. And it's just the way it works. But at the time it was certainly helpful. And, maybe there's still a place for things like that to get creative with your user base and incent them, to take advantage of whatever services you're trying to push out there so that it helps at the end of the day get you back a better return on the investment.
I think incentives are a big thing. I've been refreshed in my desire to talk about gamification. I feel like even something as simple as like badges and things like that within your user interface can get people excited about being good about doing IAM. But certainly, look, going and registering for the voice print, people are by itself not excited about doing that. But if they have a chance to win something out of it, or they get a sticker or whatever you're doing, incentivizing users, I think ought to be at least a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, you want to drive the behavior where you want it to go, right? So if you can incent users to do the right thing, no matter what it is, then whatever money you spend that way, is probably going to help drive it, is going to be a good thing. So yeah, encourage the behavior you want to see, discourage the behavior that you don't want to see.
One of the things that you mentioned in terms of kind of methods for multi-factor is hard tokens, and a real popular version of that today is the YubiKey. I did just want to bring that up. So that's a great scenario where you don't have people necessarily where you want to rely on phones. However, they're kind of expensive, right? You've got the cost of the token, but one thing not to lose sight of is the cost of administering that process, issuing those, and kind of life cycle of those. And so I think a lot of folks think, that's the first thing that comes to mind, and it's great. But if you have a very large population of users, it might not be feasible. Let's take that Instacart example. It's not going to be feasible for Instacart to issue YubiKeys. It's going to create a poor user experience. I don't think IVR is right for those users either, but some kind of adaptive authentication, something where you can send something via SMS. And look, SMS is, we know it's insecure because of SIM hacking and things like that. However, sim hacking to steal somebody's shopping preferences is probably not something someone's going to go through, right? So again, it's just taking that risk-based approach and saying, let's not let perfection be the enemy of good enough or better. That's kind of the old Six Sigma philosophy. It's like, let's improve a process. Let's make it more secure than it is today. And again, balancing that user experience, because I think that's key here.
Anything is better than nothing. That's the way I feel.
That's probably true.
Instacarts, we keep getting back to Instacart. Don't mean to beat up on them, but they have an app, right? And you can build in the push authentication into the app. So I don't really see that as an excuse. And where is the app? It's on your mobile device, which you have to have a phone number to register and sign up with. So there you go. Another avenue that they could probably push something down. You mentioned email before. So there's plenty of options there. I feel like, something to consider for folks down the road.
Well, here's the sad part is that I think there's nothing that motivates people to act more than a crisis. And, you hate to think that it's going to take a crisis to act, but I mean, to use a real world example as maybe a horrible example, but 9/11, right? 9/11 happened in the United States. Now to get on an airplane, you have to go through all these processes. I remember showing up for airplanes like 10 minutes before they boarded and just flying through security prior to 9/11 and just getting on a plane. And it was, you could pack your Bowie knife in your carry-on and get through. Maybe not, but you get what I'm saying is like that crisis spun out into all these different new actions. And I see it a lot in information security where organizations fall victim to some of these things, which were, which are foreseeable. And then when the crisis hits, then the investment follows. I guess what I would recommend or urge for our fellow practitioners is try to get ahead of it, try to do the planning, at least be vocal about what the risks are, because that puts you in a good position that no one can say, why didn't you tell us this could happen? We didn't know. That's the position our fellow practitioners need to avoid, is that they never spoke up. They never communicated the risks. And then the crisis takes place. And then you are the fall guy or fall gal, whichever the case may be.
Remove ignorance as a defense mechanism by informing the appropriate people, right? And it all comes down to a risk in a business decision. Do you want to invest the money before or after the breach? So, what's going to be more expensive? Will your organization survive a breach? Right. So that's another thing too, is, if something bad were to happen, is it something that your organization could recover from? So that's part of the equation as well. And, informing the appropriate folks who would make the ultimate decision on budgets and, directives and so forth. Again, remove ignorance of that from the defense, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that people are aware of the challenges and, what the recommendations are. And if there's a decision made not to follow the recommendation, then at least I would feel better sleeping at night saying, okay, well, I made the recommendation. This is what I feel like, and ultimately the decision was made not to follow it. I've done what I can. Let me move on. We try to bring it up maybe a different way later on, or maybe something else comes up. Those sorts of things. Not necessarily let it die, but sometimes it is what it is. Well, we've been jabbering about MFA for like 45 minutes, so I think that's plenty of time to spend on it. What do you think?
I think we could go on for another 45, but I'm with you there.
I'm afraid we would keep jumping on Instacart.
One of these upcoming episodes, we got to take, each of these topics and kind of drill into them. One of the things we didn't talk much about today was FIDO 2. We've got an upcoming episode to talk to somebody from FIDO. I don't want to give away the big name that we have lined up, but
we can.
That's going to. Can we? Okay. Andrew Shikiar, CEO of FIDO, is going to join us. And hopefully that will be our next episode. I mean, FIDO is really, an opportunity to, leverage some of the technology, but also just the consumer devices that have strong MFA already built into them to leverage that authentication in the authentication process for your enterprise or web applications.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how this is something that I think has been coming for a long time, being able to take advantage of things like Windows Hello, Apple's Face ID and Touch ID, and the Google equivalents, et cetera, to be able to authenticate users. And I think the big thing is FIDO2 and the web authentication protocol or standard that they're putting out there, and the fact that they've got all of the major players essentially on board. You've got Apple, Microsoft, and Google, all contributing to this effort, which I think is a great thing. It's not something that you see all the time, right? Where essentially competitors in a variety of spaces have come together, but they're really looking to solve the authentication challenge. So looking forward to that conversation with Andrew coming up.
It's one of the security is one of the places where I think we can all agree on what the bad guy is or the bad actor. It's people trying to access people's accounts and they're not supposed to. We all have a right to our own data and not have people steal it. So I don't think this is, our society is as polarized on many things, but I think this is something we can all kind of agree on. And that's probably why, all the tech giants can come together and kind of agree to some security standards, because it moves the ball forward. It makes it harder for those bad actors to, perpetrate their crimes. These are crimes.
Yep. Reduces risk, improves the user experience. Sounds like a win-win to me. So we're looking forward to talking with Andrew and learning more about FIDO and FIDO2 here in the near future. So folks can look forward to that. Anything else that you want to close up with, Jim?
No, I mean, it's, the summer's drawing to a close, and I'd like to go enjoy a little bit of sun and fun this weekend. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, finally some decent weather here in the Chicago area. So we're looking at like high 70s, only in the 50 or 60% humidity range. So that's good. So maybe we'll get out and maybe we'll hit Top Golf this weekend. Not quite sure yet, but big weekend plans.
Yeah. Just socially distance, wear your mask, and when you, at least when you're around other people, and try to enjoy the rest of the summer. Or
yep, exactly.
If you're in the southern hemisphere, see, this is part of what I think we run into, Jeff, is our U.S. centric focus, right? I keep saying enjoy the summer. Well, in the southern hemisphere, it's not summer, right?
Right. It's winter. You've got hurricanes bearing down on Florida right now, and all kinds of other stuff going around. So I guess enjoy life wherever you are and stay happy and healthy. How about that?
I like that. I like that.
Globally generic enough for everybody. Okay, good.
We shouldn't have offended anybody by stay happy.
Right. Yeah. All right. So with that, we're going to close it. That was a good topic we had today on multi-factor authentication. You can always visit the show at identityatthecenter.com. Encourage folks to like and subscribe and do the good stuff in your podcast app for us. That helps us, grow the show and get better and better guests. And as always, you can follow us on Twitter at IDAC Podcasts, and look forward to engaging with folks there. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it for this week, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.